He was the last of Hollywood's real cowboys, quiet, rugged, and built on respect. But now, at 80 years old, Sam Elliott is done staying silent. For decades, he kept it professional, never naming names. But behind that legendary mustache and calm stare was a man holding back stories, and grudges. In a stunning turn, Elliott has finally revealed the 7 actors he couldn't stand working with. He calls one a diva in boots, another all ego, no talent, and says some made sets feel more like battlegrounds than movie scenes. For a man known for grit, grace, and keeping his mouth shut, this confession hits harder than a 6-shooter in a saloon. The cowboy cool is gone. The truth? It's unfiltered, unvarnished, and it starts now. In 2021, Sam Elliott set Hollywood ablaze with one of the most unfiltered takedowns of the year. Appearing on a podcast, the grizzled Western legend didn't just critique the power of the dog, he tore it apart. Jane Campion's Oscar-winning psychological Western was, to Elliott, nothing more than a pretentious, hollow imitation of the American West he spent his life defending. He didn't hold back. He didn't sugarcoat. And he certainly didn't care about awards. With his trademark growl, Elliott took aim directly at Benedict Cumberbatch, mocking his rigid stance, polished accent, and what he called a prissy portrayal of a rancher. "What the hell does this Brit know about the American West?" he snapped, his voice heavy with disdain. It wasn't just about acting, it was about heritage, grit, and authenticity. And in Elliott's world, those aren't things you can fake. To Sam Elliott, the West isn't a backdrop, it's sacred ground. And what the power of the dog portrayed, in his eyes, was a betrayal. Benedict Cumberbatch's performance felt artificial, like a city actor playing dress-up in cowboy boots. It was theater, not truth. The backlash came fast. Critics accused Elliott of gatekeeping the genre, of refusing to evolve, of being blind to the film's bold and inclusive take on masculinity. They said he clung too tightly to the old stoic archetype, the hardened, silent cowboy of yesterday. But Elliott didn't flinch. No apologies. No carefully crafted statements. He stood firm. Because for him, this wasn't a debate about acting styles or symbolism. It was about respect, for the land, for the life, and for the generations who actually lived it. He believed the power of the dog got the look right but not the soul. It turned cowboys into fragile caricatures instead of flawed, flesh-and-blood men. And though Cumberbatch never responded publicly, insiders say the critique cut deep. The actor had committed fully, learning ranch work, staying in character, giving everything. But to Elliott, none of that could compensate for what he saw as a fundamental misunderstanding. For him, the cowboy isn't just a role, it's a reality you have to earn. In Sam Elliott's mind, the West isn't something to be interpreted, it's something to be understood. The West isn't a costume, a lighting scheme, or an Oscar campaign, it's a way of life based on solitude, struggle, and unspoken rules. To Sam Elliott, the power of the dog broke those rules, maybe not on purpose, but because he didn't know any better, and he couldn't keep quiet about it. Nicolas Cage Sam Elliott has always believed in the power of self-control. In his world, acting is like a calm storm that is planned and thought out. Just a moment of silence can say a lot. A quick look can tell you a whole story based on the toughness of real life and the discipline of old movies. For Elliott, the quietest person in the room is often the most important person in the room. He believed that the weakest emotion should simmer rather than explode. That's why, when Nicolas Cage stormed into the spotlight with his signature style of unhinged intensity and unpredictable energy, Sam Elliott didn't see genius, he saw disorder. Even as Cage's star rose, winning awards, making headlines, and gaining a fiercely loyal fan base, Elliott didn't see genius. Elliott wasn't impressed by Cage's acts, his crazy builds and outbursts made them seem more like theater than real ghost stories to him. Ryder put the two stars together on screen, but not in spirit. Elliott played his part with the same worn-out gravitas he brought to every other role, but when he wasn't on camera, he kept to himself. He was polite, professional, and distant. Later, Elliott would talk about actors who take over scenes with ego, those who make the story fit their own self-expression instead of the character. Friends close to him say there was no doubt who he meant when he said, "More fireworks than flame." It was a telling line, an attack on show over substance. To Elliott, Elliott thought the best acting came from stillness, the kind that lets the audience lean in and feel the undercurrent, while Cage felt that chaos was more important than clarity, performance over presence. Elliott thought that Cage's energy was empty, no matter how many awards he won, how many directors praised his willingness to take risks, or how many times viewers praised his lack of predictability. Elliott didn't see evolution, he saw decay. The still slowness didn't change his mind. The burning art form he admired was being overtaken by noise. This wasn't out of anger or competition. Elliott never wanted to compete, he just stuck to his own code, which was based on honesty, patience, and respect for the quiet times. As an actor, you should never be the center of attention. Instead, you should disappear into the truth of the part. Nicolas Cage's obscene flourishes and strange choices broke that rule, and for Sam Elliott, that wasn't just a difference in style, it was a fundamental betrayal of what acting should be done by Kevin Costner. Sam Elliott made a name for himself not only as an actor, but also as a Hollywood original. From the dirt in his voice to the slow, deliberate gait of a man who's walked long roads, Elliott was one of a kind. Elliott didn't just play cowboys, he was one himself, having grown up in the American West and learned the ways of ranch life. Elliott brought real-life experience to every part, he wasn't relying on scripts and clothes to show grit, he had it in his bones. The sunburned skin, the narrowed eyes. It was impossible to fake his stares or pauses before speaking, his characters seemed to have lived hard lives before the cameras even started rolling. So when Kevin Costner went into the cowboy genre, first with Wyatt Earp and then with the huge hit Yellowstone, Elliott didn't buy the performance. He thought Costner showed Hollywood's perfect version of the West, where the boots are clean, the dialogue is smooth, and the cattle don't smell like anything. Brought a brooding intensity to the screen and told Elliott what he really thought, it was all too pretty and measured, more fashion spread than frontier suffering. In a private conversation with a close friend, Elliott is said to have laughed and said, "He plays a rancher like it's dress up, like he's cosplaying something he doesn't really understand." This wasn't just a jab at Costner's acting, it was a comment on a whole culture of storytelling that Elliott thought had lost touch with its roots. He thought the Western was sacred, not a commercial. Rather than a genre, it stood for a philosophy of quiet power, honor, and respect for the land and the people who worked it. He didn't find any of that in Yellowstone, even though it drew millions of people with its wide views, generational conflicts, and Costner's gruff voice. Boots wasn't interesting to Elliott, he saw it as a glorified soap opera. Reports came out that he was even offered a cameo on the show, maybe as a nod to his fame as a Western icon, but Elliott turned it down flat, according to a person close to the production. He reportedly said it was just a soap opera with a cowboy hat on. For him, the choice wasn't just about a single role, it was about values and honesty. He felt like he would be betraying himself and the Western spirit he carried in his soul if he played a part in something he didn't respect. The tension between Elliott and Costner never turned into public fights or open hostility, they never yelled at each other, but the chill between them could freeze a desert. It wasn't personal, it was Principal Sam. Elliott stood for the old rules, which were. Costner, for all his fame and success, represented a version of the West that Elliott didn't recognize. He was over the top, 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 and hollow. If there's one thing that bothers Sam Elliott the most, it's pretense. Not the usual arrogance, but the kind that dresses up as deep art, plays off as brilliance, and seeks attention while pretending to be committed to Elliott. Truth instead of show. When Jared Leto got a lot of attention for his over-the-top acting, he sent rats to his co-stars on Suicide Squad to make them stay in character, which blurred the lines between performance and identity. Elliott didn't see a leader, he saw a showman trying to get attention. He's acting like he's in a carnival, Elliott is said to have told a longtime friend, rolling his eyes at what he saw as performance art gone wrong. For Elliott, stunts dressed up as dedication craft were not admirable. Outside of the camera, his mind wasn't supposed to be acting, it was supposed to be honest. To give a great performance, you didn't have to scare your co-stars or live as your character all the time, you just had to know the truth of the story and fall into it. Elliott and Leto have never worked together, but people in the business say they almost did. Elliott was briefly involved with a movie that changed after Jared Leto was cast. As soon as Elliott learned of the change, he quietly quit the project. A news article: "No exciting ending for a man who sees acting as holy ground," Elliott's statement was silence. He would never share room with someone who made him feel like their acting was less important. People who know Elliott well say it's not jealousy or generational bias, but a basic difference in values. Elliott thinks that the best acting doesn't draw attention to itself, it whispers, it's a loaded silence. With a heavy look, having a personality that doesn't need tricks or props. Leto's method, on the other hand, seemed to. Elliott liked how acting for the sake of headlines made the role less important than the story around it. Jared Leto may be respected in some parts of Hollywood because of his Oscar and cult following, but in Sam Elliott's eyes, he represents everything the industry has lost: humility, restraint, and the quiet dignity of just doing the work. To Elliott, acting isn't about changing at all costs, it's about telling the truth. Jared Leto is the poster child of a modern era obsessed with performance over purpose. Shock over. So Elliott stays away, not because he doesn't like them, but because he respects the skill he spent his whole life defending in a time when louder often means better. Sam Elliott is still dedicated to the quiet strength of discipline and will leave anything that goes against it. Adam Scott: to Ashley Kutcher, Elliott's acting has never been about fame, followers, or hitting the numbers. For him, it's a skill that should be respected, earned, and carried with a quiet dignity. He comes from the old school where every word spoken on screen was taken seriously. Because presence should come from real life, not media training. When Ashton Kutcher, fresh off of sitcom fame and romantic comedies and tech investments, was cast with Sam Elliott in Netflix's The Ranch, it wasn't a clash of egos, it was a collision of worlds from the start. Sam Elliott kept things professional, he showed up on set and delivered his lines with the same gravitas that had defined his decades-long career, but several crew members said there is an obvious tension in the air that isn't overpowering. Someone who worked with Elliott said they overheard him say, "He's a decent guy but no real actor." Instead of ranting or blowing up, he would give a quiet shake of the head, a narrowed gaze, or a muttered comment that said more than a monologue. That wasn't said out of spite or jealousy, it was the hard truth in Elliott's eyes. Kutcher, even though friendly and charming, stood for something Elliott had grown to dislike in modern Hollywood, a system that put charm above all else. Over-the-top image over substance. While Elliott spent years working his way up with small roles, grizzled side characters, and gained respect over time, Kutcher became famous overnight with one-liners from sitcoms, paparazzi coverage, and viral appeal. Ashton Kutcher was kind, he called Elliott a mentor, praised his experience, and often gushed about how happy he was to work with a legend. But Elliott wasn't convinced. He once told Kutcher behind closed doors, "He's acting like a guy who watched acting videos on YouTube." Elliott thought it wasn't enough to play a part, you had to live it, understand it, and struggle with its facts. Kutcher's happy energy was good for the crowd, but Elliott thought real stories needed more weight. Sam Elliott never took it personally. He didn't ruin scenes, refuse to interact, or try to overshadow his co-star. His resistance wasn't out of ego, it was about standing up for a skill that was important to him in a business that was becoming more and more influenced by trends. Elliott saw himself as the last person to protect the old code of depth and honesty in his guidance to him. He thought acting was holy, and even though he didn't like how current stars behave, he would never give up the values that got him there, not for ratings, not for relevance, not for anything. Jane Campion in 2022. After Sam Elliott's sharp criticism of The Power of the Dog, things came to a head, and director Jane Campion didn't hold back when she accepted the top award at the Directors Guild of America Awards. Campion shocked everyone by calling. She insulted Elliott with the same sharpness he was known for in his most cutting on-screen moments. It wasn't just a jab, it was a full-throated response to what she saw as an outdated, sexist, and provincial attack on her film, her craft, and more specifically her right to tell a Western story. The feud started when Elliott, in an unusually frank podcast, criticized the power of the dog, called out the lead performance in the movie, made fun of Benedict Cumberbatch's performance as a cowboy, and people laughed at how well the movie understood the American West, but what many people found most pointed was his criticism of Campion herself. He thought that a filmmaker from New Zealand had no right to try to explore the psychological depths of cowboy culture. For Elliott, it wasn't just a matter of geography, it was also a matter of legitimacy. He didn't see Campion's film as a bold reimagining of the Western genre, but as a stylized outsider's interpretation that lacked the lived-in truth. He admired Campion for her fierce intelligence and uncompromising vision. "He's not a cowboy," she said simply, "he's an actor." She wasn't going to let that go at the DGA podium. Not only did her words reverberate through the industry because they were directed at a Hollywood legend, but they also went against the very values Elliott had worked so hard to build. For many, it was a public reckoning, a clash between old Hollywood values and a new era of inclusive, genre-challenging storytelling. But Campion didn't stop there, she also accused. The fact that Elliott called the movie sexist showed that he didn't like how it looked at repressed masculinity and emotional depth, especially since it was directed by a woman for Campion. Elliott's criticism wasn't about how well the movie was made, it was about control. She thought it was an attempt to keep a genre historically dominated by male voices and viewpoints from women out. The backlash made headlines, and Elliott didn't openly respond to Campion's criticism, but people who knew him say he wasn't affected by it and that his principles stayed the same, even if they cost him favor in the most exclusive parts of Hollywood. Elliott's disagreement with the power of the Dog's creative team wasn't just a disagreement, it was a philosophical divide. It showed that Sam Elliott's anger isn't limited to actors who seek spectacle or performances he finds fake, he's also willing to fight with directors, no matter how well known, if he thinks they've betrayed what the Western stands for. Jeff Bridges. Once. While Sam Elliott and Jeff Bridges seemed like two sides of the same weathered coin, each grounded, both soulful, each sporting a quiet weight that made each word they spoke on screen feel like scripture when they shared the display screen within the huge Lebowski, their chemistry changed into undeniable. Elliott's deep deliberate cadence as the stranger balanced flawlessly with Bridges' laid-back embodiment of the dude off-screen. The admiration felt real. They had been guys of similar material, stoic, real, born of grit instead of glamour. However, some things shifted inside the years that accompanied mainly after Bridges' Oscar win for Loopy Coronary Heart in 2010. At the same time as the win become well-deserved, Bridges gave a raw, heartbreaking overall performance as a washed-up U.S.A. singer. The ones near Sam Elliott say it marked the beginning of a slow, quiet fracture. Jeff had become more difficult to attain. One supply stated he failed to change overnight, but there was a different tone within the way he carried himself, greater, curated, extra polished, much less available to Elliott. The shift become diffused, however simple. He'd constructed his career at the idea that achievement should not alternate who your repute was. In no way the purpose. Truth changed into while he noticed Jeff Bridges begin to circulate in greater elite circles, supply glossier interviews, and undertake the tone of a person deeply privy to their Hollywood stature. Elliott felt a distance develop. It wasn't envy, it was sadness. He believed he'd misplaced a kindred spirit to a model of the industry they as soon as quietly resisted collectively. In a later interview, Elliott made a cryptic, however telling, remark: "Some folks exchange, others simply display who they usually had been." Many fanatics and insiders alike examined between the strains and noticed it as a veiled reflection on Bridges. It wasn't merciless, but it became pointed, a diffused hurt expressed in Elliott's signature style, no longer loud, no longer accusatory, simply authentic. The silence among the two grew. They stopped attending every other's premieres. Mutual aid, once supplied without hesitation, appeared to disappear. No more joint appearances, no public nods or reward, and whilst neither man ever aired grievances in public, the absence said enough for Elliott. The pain failed to come from betrayal, it got here from go with the flow, the ache of dropping someone he as soon as known as a Brother no longer to malice however to evolution that kind of loss cuts deeper than a feud it is now not something you combat about it something you mourn in Elliott's eyes the bond they shared were constructed on honesty on an unspoken knowledge of what it meant to be guys of precept in an industry of phantasm while that honesty diminished so did the bond and for a man like Sam Elliott who holds loyalty as sacred that silence spoke louder than any argument ever may want to what do you consider the actors that Sam Elliott hates go away us your comments. In the phase under we are hoping you've got discovered this useful video recall to depart a like percentage and join the channel if you want it thanks for looking this and notice you in the subsequent videos goodbye.